Back on JoyNews desk, we now go to the Labadi Beach Hotel for that live event.
On personal information, right? There are two acts. Pardon me, it escapes me, but there are essentially two acts. One that deals with how you handle public information, and the other one that deals with disclosure. So organizations need to, on the one hand, balance their responsibilities on how they handle public information, and then at the same time, their responsibilities to make public information available upon request using the right procedure. But at the end of the day, this is how we see the implementation of that definition that I have just shared with you. If done right, you will have a sustainable high performance across the SEs. Why is that important? Dr. Yamson said it. More than 60% of our productive capacity sits in the SEs. So if the SEs are well run, and by that I mean roles, duties, and responsibilities are clear and are lived right, the direction for an SE is always very clear to everyone. We run a program called the Leadership Journey. And it is not uncommon for us to interview the board of a company and the extended leadership team. And for as many people as we interview, we have as many definitions of what the strategy of the organization is. It is not uncommon. I dare say that if we run it in any of these organizations represented here, we will see the same pattern. And it takes a very strong board, it takes a very well-led board, it takes a very cohesive board to ensure that, first of all, the direction is clear, it is coherently articulated, and that it can be lived by all the members of the organization, from the very top to the very bottom. Direction is key. And in many cases where SEs fail, it is because there is lack of clear direction. The board is going in one direction, the chief executive and his team are going in another direction, and the managers are also having their own little tete-a-tete somewhere. The other part is the legal and regulatory compliance. There are many SEs that are not compliant, but because they are in the public sector, as it were, a blind eye and a wink is what often is the response. And where there is enforcement, I think some years back, Electricity Corporation decided that all SEs will pay their bills. Do you remember? Do you remember the chaos? When institutions were asked to go and pay their electricity bills, some even resisted the installation of prepaid meters. You remember? This is essentially a resistance of good behavior. And so some install generators rather than go and pay their bills. Risk management is another issue. Clearly, nobody saw COVID coming. But when COVID came, some countries responded very well, some institutions responded very well, others also experienced abject failure. Why is that? Some organizations inherently were ready. I'll give you an example outside the SE environment, and you can judge for yourself. When COVID came, church services or religious services ceased. Some churches didn't blink. They immediately seamlessly shifted to online services. Other places who saw technology as a work of the devil and did not have any technology in place suddenly found that the church ceased. And then you had complaints. People are not coming to church, they will go to hell. But the issue really was that the offerings were not coming. So you need to understand what are the potential risks for your organization and look far and think about how we might possibly address these issues should they materialize. And that is the first responsibility of the governing body of every SE, being the board. The other issue is internal controls, and I know that we love internal controls. You go into any organization and there's internal audit, and it's a very powerful role. And in recent times, we've had discussions about internal audit being pulled out of the SEs to sit in their own, is it department, or we have the Ghana Audit Service, so internal audit service is the conversation that is going on right now, to make them more independent and less beholden to the management and the board of any particular organization. Why is this an issue? It's an issue because clearly governance is failing. And when the Public Accounts Committee does its report, 20-something years, 28, almost 30 years into democratic rule, we still have incidences where Parliament has to sanction or recommend sanctions for bad behavior, for poor governance, essentially, because internal controls are failing. It's an indictment on the quality of internal governance, of corporate governance across the SC, and something that now there's a conversation about how to address. Finally, there's a matter of building the right relationships with stakeholders. How best do we ensure that every part of the organization, both the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders, feel confident about how the organization is being led? In the last week, we've had huge conversations in the media about school feeding and the success of or lack of success when it comes to school feeding. And it took the minister to leave his office, go on a field trip, take photographs to demonstrate that the issue is not as grave as it is. But even there, once there was smoke, people wanted to see fire. And there was a resistance to the clear demonstration that whilst there were issues, they were not as explosive as was being discussed. Why is that so? Because there's a disconnect. Some parents, some teachers, some administrators felt they were not being listened to, and that was at the root of the whole conversation. They felt that they did not have a voice. So if you don't have the right relationships with the stakeholders, these things will happen. And I'm not saying this to criticize anyone. I'm merely citing an example that the issue was not, for me, not even about the availability of food, but it was the underlying statement was that people did not feel they had a voice. It is critical that the board ensures that all stakeholders are satisfied that they have the right amount of voice, and that when they speak, there's a fair hearing and an adequate response. Are there any questions, any comments at all? Okay.
Now, from those corporate governance matters being discussed at the Labadi Beach Hotel, we take a break. When we return, we bring you business.